Good afternoon, esteemed guests, colleagues, and friends. I hope this week has been treating you well. My name is Jean-François Pomerol. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tribun Health. And it brings me an immense pleasure to welcome you to today's seminar. Before we start, I want to express my gratitude to each of you for being there. Your presence underscores our collective commitment to pushing the boundaries of medical science and improving patient care. For those who might not be familiar with Tribun Health, we specialize in AI-powered digital pathology solution. With over 16 years of experience, we have been dedicated to developing informatics solutions tailored for pathology labs, striving to innovate continuously to better support pathologists and enhance patient outcomes. I'm thrilled to share that our image management solution, CaloPix, has been recognized for the third year consecutive as a best-in-class digital pathology solution in 2024, a testament to its value for our customer. Today, we are very honored to showcase one of our esteemed customers, the Centre Hospitalier de l'Université de Montréal, the CHUM. They have been doing groundbreaking work in pathology, leveraging our technology for quite some time. And our session today features a distinguished speaker, Dr. Vincent Trinh. And Dr. Trinh is not only a respected staff pathology at CHUM, but also serves as principal investigator and director of the histology core at the Institute for Research for Immunology and Cancer at the University of Montreal. He did his medical training and residency at the University of Montreal and his fellowship in GI and liver pathology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. He stayed at Vanderbilt for 2 years as a research instructor, and in 2019, he returned back to Montreal as a liver, pancreas, and molecular pathologist at the CHUM, as well as principal investigator and core director at the Institute for Research in Immunology and Cancer. His research program focuses on liver and pancreas tumor microenvironment using transgenic mouse models, multiplex imaging, spatial transcriptomics, and foundational modeling of epithelium stroma networks. Dr. Trin's expertise and dedication have played a pivotal role in shaping academic pathology at CHUM. His presentation will describe the transformation journey of achieving a fully digital pathology department, a milestone reached back in 2019 at CHUM, and the integration of artificial intelligence into clinical practice. So, without further ado, let's extend a warm welcome to our esteemed speaker, Dr. Vincent Trinh. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for coming today. I think it's quite a pleasure to be here to talk about, just showcase the CHUM. It was a lot of work to bring digital pathology and completely transform our hospital and pathology department, which is an academic, a complex, government-funded academic institution, to digital pathology. And I can tell you right now that no pathologist can imagine going back to slides after spending so many years doing digital pathology. It's so much better, so much more comfortable. Just disclosures, travel expenses to USCAP was covered by Tribun. I'm also a consultant for small startups in Montreal. So yes, the Centre Hospitalier de l'Université de Montréal, just for context, is a government-funded, so there's issues associated with that in terms of funding, but it's a government-funded teaching hospital, 772 beds. We screen a lot of our lab takes care of a lot of the smaller institutions around us. Around the mid-2010s in Quebec, they grouped as a cost-controlling measure, they grouped laboratories in the province of Quebec together into different clusters. We are in the University of Montreal OptiLab cluster with a referral center for that. I think it's 8 hospital cluster. We represent 50% of the volume and about 25% of the volume of the province of Quebec. It's a province around 8 million people. Our team is 23 surgical pathologists. This includes cytologists that also do surg path and molecular pathology. We're 7 APs, around 20 residents, but this was a while ago. Another challenge is that the government started cutting down on a residency position for pathology to increase the number of positions in family medicine because we're lacking a lot of family medicine in Canada. So the volume, this is, I think, 2022 numbers. So 40,000 resections, 65,000 biopsies, 5 consultations and referrals, 300 autopsies. I think now it's closer to 500, and about 700,000 surgical pathology slides and 71,000 cytology. I think now we're nearing closer to 800,000 surgical pathology slides. So all of this started in 2012, 2013. It was actually Dr. Bic Nguyen, who was our chief at that time, that had this idea to bring digital pathology to the CHUM. This was in the very early days of digital pathology. I think initially it was maybe her that would have been better suited to present today, but you'll see after why. She's very occupied with trying to deploy digital pathology throughout the province and to all the pathology labs in Quebec. This was a big effort, especially when things were starting so much at that time. So we needed the management of our cluster, the management of our hospital, biomedical engineering, IT, but at the same time, our collaborators in Tribun Health for the image management software, laboratory information system, and the tracking system. I'll mention this a bit further along, but her original goal, and I remember saying that, I was still a medical student at that time. I remember she was like, her goal was not to just bring digital like slides and all that. Her goal was really to implement artificial intelligence and really push our field towards the future. I remember her saying that in 2013, 2014, and I'm very happy to see that she completely pushed through with the idea. So how did she convince our public system that is constantly underfunded to push digital pathology and put it in? And it's something that I'll try to broach during the presentation, but our context was mostly, at the beginning, was a collaboration with the industry, early phase of digital pathology, but it was presented as an internal research project to increase productivity in a context of maybe we can automate some steps, not all of them, but some steps due to the lack of pathologists, the lack of training pathologists. At the same time, to maybe increase interest in our field and automate not just our job, but also the jobs for the support staff, technologists, and transform their tasks from something a bit more repetitive to something a bit more intellectual and challenging. And the potential for increased productivity, another thing a bit particular to Quebec, but also I think some places in Canada, are the different expectations for turnaround times. It's a bit longer in Canada. In this context, I found that digital pathology is really important. It's very helpful. So today, we're going to talk about the first part, implementation. Again, it's a mix of my slides and Dr. Nguyen's slides. Then we're going to talk about the adoption, how this progressed at our institute, what are the practical changes, and eventually we're going to talk about how we can implement artificial intelligence, but also how I use these tools to push my research program. I'm a physician scientist too, by the way, so half of my time is at the research lab. So for the implementation, there's a rationale for modernizing in 2013. There were challenges, so increased number of cases, complexities, shortage of everything. It's just gotten worse since then, so that was very timely to have started that so early. And there were opportunities in 2013, so the healthcare system at that time was reorganizing. We are going through another reorganization. Each government that goes through tries to reorganize everything every time. A creation of UpsiLab created like maybe a vacuum in like where we're going to push pathology, but also would designate central laboratories instead of splitting everything into different hospitals and having redundancy with the machines. So this was the implementation calendar. It's very long. I think one of the messages she wanted to pass is like, this seems long. I think now with the companies that are so used to collaborating with each other between the LIS and the IMS, between the tracking system and I think, and the scanners and the IMS and the LIS, it's become much more fast. But at that time, it was a bit slower. So we got the first scanner in 2012, and the first step was to integrate IT, the LIS, and the tracking system to just create the backbone. It's things that you don't expect, especially, well, we kind of expected it, but in a situation where it's underfunded, it's publicly funded, it's not always well updated, it's understaffed. For example, like the operating systems of the different machines, the bandwidth, connecting the systems together, are they on the same network in the hospital? These are all issues they had to deal with at that time. Then 2014, 2016 was still mostly the integration, optimization of the workflow, just getting used to it. At that time, not many papers telling you how to organize your lab. We kind of, from what I understood, they mostly winged it and tried to see maybe you should organize, put that there. Then we have one tech there, one tech there. I'll go into more details after. But there was a lot of dealing with that. In 2016 was the additional scanner, and this was really where we can talk about starting to integrate everything together, really transform towards digital pathology. So the integration of LIS, the scanners, and the IMS, and that was our partner at that time, still now, it was Tribun. And then hit with delays. So you can almost skip 2017 because that was when the clusters were starting to form together, caused a lot of issues. And then in 2018, that nice picture of of my hospital that I showed you at the beginning was the combination of 3 other hospitals that all moved to that new super hospital, and the other hospitals closed. So that year was lost. But then in 2000, by the end of 2018, 2019, kind of put everything back together and really started practicing. I remember towards the end of my residency training, towards the end was mostly with digital pathology. I was signing out with digital pathology with my attendings. In 2019, in January, there was a Fonds de soutien à l'innovation en santé et services sociaux. It was a governmental funding support. It was accepted as it was presented like a pilot project to see if expanding digital pathology would would increase productivity, reduce turnaround time, how would it affect the technologists or lab techs. And we started implementing remote access. And in October 2019, the first AI-driven with Tribun, we did a KI67 counter that we're still using until now. It works great. And then March 2020, COVID hit. That really pushed everyone towards digital pathology, even the people that were more reluctant. I'll talk about that later. And with the additional scanners, the additional storage, and unrestricted work from home capacity, at that moment, I think it really pushed in digital pathology, and it's staying until now. In 2020, we had access for a non-CHUM pathologist who could help us sign out cases that were a bit longer, when someone would go on vacation or there were too long delays for some subspecialties. So for the implementation phase, 3 phases. Gradual. For the pilot, it's that thing I mentioned to you in 2019. It was only with 3 very eager pathologists. It was targeted at seeing how would it affect the lab tech side and how it would affect the turnaround time and the productivity of the pathologists. Then we had the deployment to all surgical pathologists and residents. And right now, we're still in that expansion to the hub and to the province. It was supposed to start in 2013. I think the money has been earmarked, but it's been very difficult with the changes in the governments and issues with the government and the ministry. It's been delayed, but it's in the plans and it's still actively being pushed. So these were the implementation challenges that Dr. Nguyen highlights. Even though the first 4 kind of look like different stuff, but I think it does boil down to funding. So the initial funding and monetary investment, the time investment, which would be time from everyone involved, the pathologists, management, the different companies had to invest in trying to implement all this. Storage space is essentially a money issue. We went for a local storage, so we have our own server. Comes with advantages, well, it's cheaper, but it's disadvantages, less well maintained, so we're having issues now. These are all considerations to have, and also the bandwidth. Technical support from all parties was an initial challenge. I think it was mostly, from what I understood, a thing of the past, because these companies didn't really know each other so well. And to implement this is essentially 2 groups working together, like the LIS with the scanners, the LIS with the image management software and the tracking system. All of this are essentially different companies, different groups having to work together. And you'll see our LIS team kind of, I think, I wasn't so involved, but I think they had issues and they kind of pushed back, and everybody else had to compensate for the issues with the LIS. Another thing that Dr. Nguyen approached, and she's very a lot into this, is to like change management, the concept of how you can apply change or incite change in any organization or groups. There was 3 things that stood out for her and was very important for her. It's just, of course, you have to consider it at the organization level, but at the same time, a gradual change. Don't go in, well, she didn't go in, we didn't go in completely all at once. We went with a few pathologists at a time. Then we slowly increased capacity with the scanning, the storage, and just slowly stepped into the full transition. But while you're doing all of that, looking at the smaller change, the organization, at the same time, everybody had to accept or understand what were their new roles, from the support staff, the technologists, to everything else. So of course, there's the planning, change management. At the same time, you have the dealing with the equipment and measure of change. These are all extremely important stuff in trying to follow, because there's so many groups involved, right? And sometimes biomedical engineering that did not get extra money, did not get extra staff to deal with this. We had to constantly remind them, can you prioritize our project? Can you prioritize the deployment? Most other actors were fine, but also same thing for IT, overwhelmed all the time in most of our hospitals in Quebec. So just reminding them. And on the pathology team, there was 5 people that were involved. A project leader, Dr. Nguyen, the manager, Nathalie, lab manager was Chantal Bédard, and the different platform managers and lead technologists, Richard Galland. These are all people that were strongly involved in this transition. Again, we're talking about like connectivity, interoperability. This is a very, I think, was the main challenge of the CHUM, especially at that time when people didn't know each other so well. In our format, and I think most formats are like that, everything was focused on the LIS provider. Then the LIS provider kind of stepped away from this. So it became challenging, but the scanner were connected to LIS. The LIS is also connected, it's not on the picture, to the electronic medical records. So everything goes through that. The scanner will retrieve information and identify the patient, this slide belongs to who, through the LIS. The LIS is also connected to the tracking system with the QR codes, so that every time you put a slide into the scanner, it will scan the QR code to associate to the correct patient, and also the image management software. So everything was focused mostly on the LIS. And this was indeed a challenge at the beginning, but now I believe it's become much better. For the pathology team, you had, of course, pathology team, but at the CHUM, the biomedical engineering that were connected, the scanners to the LIS and to the tracking system, the IT for storage. We started with 600 terabytes local. Now we're at, I think, 1.6 petabytes local. Cloud was considered, was not so used. And then you also have like the image management software provider for the main database. And everything was mostly connected, like I said, to the, like centrally, locally to the LIS and to the storage. In parallel, the IT team had to deal with remote access and providing remote access to all the pathologists. Now we're at 40% work from home limit, 60% on site. And yes, that's it. Other considerations to have, so for example, the laboratory setup considerations, room for scan. These are things that I think with time we realized was important. Room for the scanners, access, easy access to the rears for maintenance and repair, stable ground, clean, proximity to the histology lab, large computer desk, and racks to hold the slide trays before and after the scanning. The office setup, much cleaner, much neater now, but everything, it was essentially, you need good quality screens, 3 of them, and a slightly more powerful computer, but nothing that extravagant. And for the workflow reorganization, went from organizing slides into trays, and then putting them into racks. There was one additional step, was making sure that the racks, the slides were clean. There was not too much mounting media. This was an added step. So you need a tech to double check all the slides before racking them up, and then putting them into the machine to scan them. And then there was another step of quality control. You'll have a tech make sure that all the slides are well scanned, and then they're sent out to the pathologist, to their desk, to the IMS. So indeed, we used Catopix by Tribun. These were the criteria that was the most important for us for the long term. So integration with most scanner types, user-friendly viewer management system, ability to integrate AI modules for slide collections, research, external access and consults, and technical support from the vendor. These were very important. And yes, for the pilot phase, that initial phase that was so important to convince management, convince the ministry to invest in this, we took 3 champions, 3 pathologists that were quite eager, And we wanted to look at the impact on turnaround time, on case output, how much time did you save, and changes. And this is the most of the thing. I think the take-home message for us, in our experience, it was a trade-off for the laboratory in hindsight. Initially, it was barely any work for pathologists because you only had, for the techs, because you only had 3 pathologists. But now I think it's mostly a trade-off. So you would have one full-time equivalent dealing with slide distribution, another with retrieval and archival. Those positions have mostly been eliminated. For the pathologists, the turnaround time at our institute for the 3 pathologists over a year was 18% reduction for biopsies, 25% for surgeries. Per pathologist, there was an increase in 17% of cases signed out, controlled for everything else. And this was a weird thing. We put 3.5 hours, but we tried to measure how much time it took us to pick up the tray, and look for the trays, put the slides onto the machine, onto the microscope, and compare it to afterwards. We put it at around 3.5 hours a week of not dealing with slides per pathologist. We also looked at how it would affect the IHC quality assurance. So the technologists or the coordinators would have to review the slides. They would try to review the slides now through scanning. It barely changed, but then we added a slide scanning task, and right now it is mostly a trade-off. We're at 2 to 2.5 additional full-time equivalents on the technical side. So in our context, a big improvement for pathologists. On the quantifiable side, just mostly a trade-off for the technologists. And I think this is something that we've discussed, and I've discussed with other centers, including the United States. It's like turnaround time, productivity, when you try to convince. I think these are the 3 things that it boils down to, because you have some papers that say, well, productivity is the same, turnaround time is slightly longer, others it's very different, others show a strong improvement. We show a strong improvement. I think it depends on the healthcare model, if it's public versus private. The turnaround time, some institutions, I remember Vanderbilt, turnaround time was so fast that, we had 100 GI biopsies, 100 patients the previous day, and the slides were on our desk the next morning at 4:30 a.m. So I'm not, maybe in that context, it's the improvement is not obvious or might be not there. However, if you're in a context where the turnaround time is much longer or it's more difficult, you have to triage, you have to go, you do a stain, you do a case, then you ask for IHCs, then you put the slides somewhere, then the slides come in through 2-3 days after that. I think the improvement is very strong because you don't have to go look for the slides and the different trays that you kept somewhere and you have to go back to. And also there's the payment model. In a salaried environment, maybe for pathologists, not the most enticing environment, but in a fee-for-service, increased productivity does come back to a higher paycheck in a few months that will appear in your bank account. So yes, by 2019, the end of the implementation, as we discussed, change management plan, importance of leaders, different steps, mostly a trade-off, on paper and the number of technologists, but the organization, the efficiency, the loss of slides, broken slides, dealing with so many trays, that the technologists much prefer. Increase in productivity for pathologists in our environment, and they're early adopters of just a few, maybe up to 8 pathologists at that time. So adoption, practical changes in digital pathology, next step, the presentation. Let me see what time is it. Oh, we have time. So yes, early adoption by pathologists. There's still a bit of reluctance by pathologists just within my hospital, or affiliated hospitals from the clusters. I remember some of them were kind of laughing about digital pathology. It's just like a useless tool. I don't get it. I won't name names. But you do have the adopter profile. So we saw maybe early career pathologists, physician scientists, residents, and more techies. Those were much more involved and more interested in pushing digital pathology. Resistor profile, it's I'm not blaming anyone. They have their reasons, and it's good reasons at that time. But those that were near retirement that spent 35 years doing a certain way, why would they change just for the 1-2 remaining years? No significant interest in technology or change, or no obvious or evident gain to practice for them. Sorry, M here. But then I believe the adoption was really accelerated by COVID-19. With the Quebec COVID Relief Fund, we got 5 more scanners, increased storage, Work from home was expanded to all pathologists, unrestricted. You can just stay at home throughout the pandemic. And also that would allow us to have less pathologists at the department, meaning you could have more technologists due to the personnel limitations at that time on the department. That also meant continued medical education for trainees through Zoom or Teams, and it's not fully there. There's still stuff that you could do, but if you had, in a fee-for-service model or payment model, if you didn't sign out cases, your salary would strongly drop. There were other measures to compensate for that, but that is something that would also push, favor the transition. And since then, almost, except for the pathologists that were nearing a retirement that have since retired, all other pathologists that tested digital pathology have persisted until today. There are some cases we still process we still do physical slides with, as this would be cytology cases, insufficient storage for Z-stacking, consultations and referrals. It sounds a bit benign, but you can't put a new label on top of the old label. You have to scrape off the old label to put the new label. And just that step requires so much time due to our consultation referral volume and our understaffed support staff that they could not do it. For frozens, we still keep the microscope for frozens and special stains. I think you've seen the papers, the sensitivity of detecting very small microorganisms go down on the crocut, on the zeal and PISD, and the not Wharton's, the Giemsa. So you still have to look at those special stains with the microscope. Now, if we talk about change and how we felt it, or I felt it, or most of us felt it at the CHUM following adoption, I think was mostly positive changes. After 3.5 years of adoption, it's almost in our experience, very good in all aspects. And there's something that I like to push through, and it's interesting. I was talking to our transition manager, Dr. Nathalie Dion. There's some things that are quantifiable, like the turnaround time and productivity, number of cases that are being signed down. But there's also a lot of unquantifiable value to digital pathology, and most of the value, I think, is somewhere on the unquantifiable side. And this is not just for pathologists, but also for technologists. But for the negative changes, it does boil down to money. So funding, that means that every year you have to go convince management, oh, I need more money for another year. Can you support me another year? In our current model, that doesn't reimburse digital pathology in Quebec. And also for upkeep, especially for us, we decided to save money for physical storage. So now we're coming towards the end of that physical storage, so we have to revamp the local servers. Now for the technologists, pre-implementation, a lot of slide organization, slide packing, a slide order in the tray, then taking them to the pathologist, bringing them back, reorganizing them. Since then, it's much more computer work, quality control of images, a much simplified archival of slides that are already ordered or put together per patient. But you do add the task of slide cleaning and slide racking. But if you were to walk around and ask, well, I tried to walk around. I spoke to technologists. Everyone much prefers the digital workflow compared to the old workflow. It's much more intellectual to go through these images, just setting up the machine and going and doing quality control and make sure, like, is that a floater? Did we screen everything on the slide? Oh, that area is slightly blurred. It's an important area. Maybe I'll rescan it before I send it to the pathologist. So this is much more rewarding and less walking back and forth, reduction in repetitive tasks. For the pathologist, I already mentioned this, like, there's the quantifiable stuff that I'm mentioning here, the turnaround time, productivity. Productivity is high per pathologist. Oh, sorry. Maybe I don't know what I meant there. But there's the unquantifiable value, or it would be very hard to quantify for pathologists. And the one I like the most, it's a bit odd, but it's a reduced risk of patient and slide misidentification. I remember my good days at Vanderbilt at 4:30 a.m. You'd have 500, 600 slides there in these wood trays. And you go through them, right? Because Dr. Washington would come at around 12. Oh, where are you with the cases, Vincent? Then you just go through all of them, and then you did your best to look at a name every time. These are mostly biopsies and like just tubular adenomas, and all the slides were stacked together. They did their best to not have the slides overflow on the next tray, but sometimes they didn't want to, or the trays didn't fit, so they just half of the case was on this, other half on that. So you went so quickly, and you had to check, and I have to say sometimes it got close to making a very severe error. Now that everything is organized, everything is automatically with the tracking system all next to each other. You open it, you know it's there. It's much more simpler, and I find like I still double check every time I sign on a case. I check everything, but not did I once have the issue of I really made an error. Most of the time, so well controlled. And also, there's other stuff like it's much more ergonomically better. Like I have less shoulder pain. I have no more shoulder pain. I used to have shoulder pain. I used to have back pain. Not anymore. Easier interaction with other systems. I'll show you later. Another thing that's hard to quantify is every time a clinician calls you to ask you, like, can you review this slide? Could it be humoral rejection in this liver biopsy? I don't have to say, okay, let me go look for the slides. I'll call you back. Stay on the line. You just open the case in the LIS. The slides appear in the IMS, and you have both at the same time. It's much easier to just give them a response immediately. Well, I don't have any dilation of the capillaries. I don't see any hobnailing. I can just immediately tell them I don't believe it's that. It's much more clean, no more disorganized trays. It's much easier to organize your office. And this, I'll give you an example. This is my office right here. I still have the old microscope. I think it's Dr. Romeo's microscope. Excuse me, I took it from you. But we also have this is my computer screen. On the left side, you'll see this is a shelf that was given to each pathologist to deal with the trays. Just no more trays. I keep my ongoing cases right here. I keep my liver conference cases here. These are interesting case reports for motivated residents, and these are my research slides. So this is how it looks like when I'm operating it. On the left side, I'll put my image. On the right side, I'll have the open report. So I'm just going through the images. I immediately write what I see, and I just sign out the case at the same time as soon as I close both. I think Calipix is transitioning towards mostly a web version. But when we use it, it's kind of similar to the desktop version. You can have facilitated correlation with electronic medical records. Work from home is much easier. It's almost the same thing as if you were at the hospital. And since this is an academic institution, I think there's a very strong case for digital pathology in an academic institution. Just for the recruitment, I'll talk to you about, of course, I feel that we're starting a golden era of pathology, not just with digital pathology, but with AI, molecular pathology, but spatial transcriptomics. I don't know if you know about this, but I'll show you some examples. And next year, I think I'm bringing my whole lab. We're going to present all of our projects in Boston next year at USCAP. But that interest has garnered, I feel, a lot more interest from the med students to go into pathology, especially those with an engineering background, computer science background, and a research background. Research, yes, has always been there, I think. But from the engineering computer science, it's very obvious. I put myself as a volunteer to let pre-med students and first-year students shadow me at the CHUM. I think we started just 2 months ago. I've had 4 students pass by, and I think 3 of them want to stay for a summer internship at my lab to annotate slides and can co-author these papers, put it on their CVs. But I think they're very interested there's much more interest in pathology, and there's no more that fear of, I don't like to work with microscopes or motion sickness. And I remember this newer generation, they're so used to working with computers that for them it's so natural to just looking at images on a computer. Of course, teaching, much more comfortable. The resident can annotate the slide, and then we just see the same slide. You can see the annotations for medical students, also for undergrad. So, I give a presentation about pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, so I can easily just export an anonymized slide, take it to the university, and just present this. So this is what it looks like. This is a breast cancer. You can see these different structures. Then you talk about the generalities of breast cancer. Same thing for colon cancer. It's so easy to just pull out an interesting case slide so that you can present for teaching. Multidisciplinary boards, very easy. You can just, if you're still doing it in person, just go there. Any computer that's connected to the hospital network and just open the web version and you can just go look through the slides. And of course, increase collaborations with scientists, engineers, and the industry now that everything is digital and more easy to share, where you have to go through the ethics committees and all of that. So yes, academic advantage, resident sign-out. So I just parallel this screen with my, this is the IMS screen, and the student can, the resident can follow. For molecular pathology, I do molecular pathology sign-out. We use Franklin Genooks as our bioinformatic pipeline. If I want to go review cellularity, the mutation variant allelic frequency, or this tumor subtype, or the morphology, the variant, very easy to correlate now instead of having to go find the slide or bring the slides or ask for the PhD to bring down the slide. And my lab is a bit on the other side of the, we have a small mountain in Montreal, mountain. My lab is on the other side. It's very, I can't conceive just going back and forth. I can just continue my cases or the overflowing cases from my research lab. So yes, adopted by our pathologists. Everyone's very happy. Funding issues are always to be discussed, and also future challenges. I think these, other than money, other things that are still in the way for complete adoption, like consultations. Yes, we still receive the slides from elsewhere. We also receive paperwork from elsewhere, but if the other hospital had a scanner, I think it would really accelerate consultations. Cytology, but this is more storage limitations. We're still using fax in Quebec to send out requests. I think one day when it becomes electronic, I suspect that it can easily retrieve clinical information, it can automate many more steps. Regulations for just digital pathology, regulations for artificial intelligence still need to be worked on. I think are additional challenges in the future. Now, talking about AI, how do we use this to our advantage? Of course, the field of computational pathology, so the interdisciplinary science field that augments developments of, develops computational approaches to analyze and model medical histopathology image. I published this with my close collaborator, Madi Hosseini, with a group from Toronto and a few groups in BIC. This came out in, I think, February 2024, but we went through in this paper all the computational pathology papers that were ever published up until December 2022. We organized them into the different classes. I think it's a very good paper. At the same time, we did a small form of each of these studies, I think more than 600, that tells you, well, this was the cohort, this was the number of patients, this was the model, this was the algorithms that were involved in the model, these were the results, and you have everything here up until 2022 in this paper. So if you're interested, I also give my clinical input and my interpretation of these things, if ever you're interested. So we go back to the original goal of digital pathology at the CHUM. The original goal was to deploy artificial intelligence, and when we discuss this, I think it should always revolve around patient care, and I think we can improve patient care in two ways. Productivity, which comes down to reducing turnaround time for the patients, but also accuracy and precision. And I think it's in selecting your AI algorithm or in choosing what is best. I think anything that serves these two, and I would tell you productivity is more important than accuracy and precision, not because accuracy and precision is not important, but we do so few errors, I think, during the interpretation, the analytical phase, that is mostly like post-analytical, pre-analytical issues that we all know that are driving errors in a pathology lab. But having the automation and all that can help there. But I find that if you integrate well your digital pathology platform, productivity can really be increased and improve turnaround time so the patients can receive timely treatments. And of course, I organize AI into two types of applications, clinical and research. And we'll go through them quickly. I think you can walk around here. There's really good applications. The question, I believe, is, I strongly believe they all work really well. Which one do you choose? Which one increases accuracy and precision? Which one improves productivity? But for example, RKI-67 scoring that we did in-house with Tribun, mitosis detection, these triaging, this was digestive sample triage to see if you have a long delay, which one has cancer, which one doesn't. Can apply these different algorithms to cytology slides too. And that was my quick discussion about the clinical applications of AI. But I think what I'm doing more, or in my research program, is to streamline and use the advantage of the number of slides that we have at the CHUM to do different research projects with this and improve current algorithms or adapt them to pathology. And if you're in an academic institution and it's something that interests you or you're thinking about in the future, I think there's essential options or essential functions that are required within your workflow to be able to integrate this. This includes anonymization for the ethics committee, codification of cases in case you want to correlate with prognostic data, and batch processing. When we initially asked our hospital at Citadel to do it automatically, their quote was around $120,000 was a lot. But luckily for us in the IMS, there was a way of batch processing the export of slides that we found, and I've since saved like nearly 100 terabytes of slides. And if you look at the biggest data sets and the biggest papers coming out in Nature Medicine, just 1 month ago by Faisal Mahmoud, they were only at 100,000 slides, but they aggregated all the data sets, the TCG, everything that was available, and they added their very small data set that they had access to at their institution. Just show you how much you can take advantage of if you have this in an academic institution and you do that type of research. Also, the capacity to anonymize reports. This is an example of one. You can clear away all of the clinical data, leaving you with just the results. But Citadel, like if your hospital has a data lake or like an AI wing for clinical data, they have very good algorithms on PDFs that can just eliminate all the clinical information for you, and it's pretty cheap for them because it's just PDFs. So the main research topics, I have my mice, I have my multiplex imaging and all that. I have my extracellular vesicles too, but I'm probably going to close that down because I don't have time anymore. But in our AI and image analysis wing, and in strong collaboration with Mahdi Hosseini, we're looking at, of course, in the past, convolutional neural networks has been the mainstay of machine learning. But if you see in the last few years, the first few papers, 2017, well, it's always been mentioned in the past, but started being applied more aggressively in 2017s, 18s, are vision transformers. In a CNN, you'll mostly patchify your image because it's so it's processing intensive. You'll patchify your slide, and then you'll process one slide with the other through contrastive learning. Oh, that's likely that. This is likely that. These features suggest that you have X% probability that there's cancer here. That's usually, like that patch in position A1 has no true relation to the patch that's in position U7 on your image. Now with vision transformers, these are encoders, transformers that are adapted to very large images. You feed them the large gigapixel images, like the one we have in the pathology, and they'll create the patches at different levels of sampling. So you can downsample to mimic low magnification, revert to your classical magnification at 20x, so you have like the full resolution, and you will patchify them at different sizes and also at different levels of equivalent magnification. And then they'll do the encoder feature extraction within each of these patches. But at the same time, since they have the whole slide, they'll randomly correlate and extract features that are comparing, like different areas or different patches on the same slide. So it adds a positional data. So now your A1 will be correlated eventually, if you want to, with the U7 patch. And this increases exponentially the number of parameters that are being analyzed, but at the same time, the vision transformer or the modern vision transformers, the coding behind it, makes it so quick to process the data. It won't use all the data, won't go into as much details as a CNN, but will extract the most relevant data and just reorganize the parameters into a high achieving or higher value data points or features. And this is important, I think, and we're, again, very lucky that everything is occurring at the same time. I put in a few grants on this just before coming to USCAP. But I feel that you'll see a lot of these models or these algorithms or encoders or transformers, they all come from another field, and they're not always adapted to pathology. And I feel that if you were to adapt them to pathology, to answer pathology-driven questions, I think that is where I believe you'll have your true advance in artificial intelligence. For example, this was before I started working with Mahdi. We did this taxonomy-based approach where instead of just analyzing is there cancer there, is there a lymphocyte, you categorize each cell that's segmented into one single class, because you cannot be a lymphocyte and a macrophage at the same time. So you would just reclassify everything, recreate, remap the tissue, and then foundational modeling, you re-diagnose, you try to create your diagnosis based on the composition and the features of everything that you've recreated. And this has been shown to, it was published in CVPR. It added a lot of advantage, added a lot of insights. And like, for example, we detected changes in the features, in the features of each lymphocyte as you go from low-grade tubular adenoma to high-grade tubular adenoma with high-grade dysplasia. So you can see the lymphocytes did not look the same between both cases. These are things that this type of approach could push and advance in science. And I'll just give you an example. We just submitted this to CVPR CVMI Workshop 2024. I'm very hopeful it's going to work. I was telling Maddie, yeah, sure, you have your vision transformer, and it's analyzing, like it's adding like range dependencies between your patches and extracting features from those dependencies. But what we do in pathology, like we don't just stare at squares that's on, we do look at what's next to cells. Like that cell is a lymphocyte, next to it there's a cancer cell, and you go through it. I asked Maddie, my very smart genius computer scientist, he's a PI of course, he's a professor, can you find a way to force short range dependencies between your images? So you have your patches, but then within your patches, create tokens that will look at the interactions between the groups of cells within the patch, the size of the token that you set. So we asked, like, does A1, B1, what are specific features between that transition? B1 to C1, C1 to D1, etc. Just adding that, it did add a lot of, like, millions of parameters to your analysis for each image, but just adding that, if you compare it to the other models that were published, does hit like 98.85% accuracy in detecting metastases to lymph node. And just as a proof of concept to show that, I think this is a pathology or like a biological question. I asked Maddie, run it at 5x, where these tokens are irrelevant because you're too far away, you're just looking at patches of colors and stuff like that. It did not improve the area under the curve or the accuracy. But when you ran it at higher magnification, and you were looking at groups of cells, like a few tumor cells next to lymphocytes, only then that you had a very strong increase in the accuracy and the area under the curve. So just implementing these pathology questions, I believe, they're not, most of the models that are being published are going to Nature or CVPR and all these big papers. They're not, I find that they're not really adapted to pathology, and it's as easy as saying, well, this is what we do in pathology, this is how we run our diagnosis, can you mimic that? It works so well if you have a very good engineer that works with you. And the last thing, innovation in pathology, we're talking about the golden era. You know spatial transcriptomics, they're adapted for FFPE tissue. You can just take your slide and they can screen up to 500, 5,000, and even more messenger RNA on the slide, but your slide stays intact at the end. You can take the same slide and do an H&E on it. So the image that you see on the left has about 500 layers of gene expression data straight on the image. So this is the best tool for our specialty, especially in the sense that I work on pyloric metaplasia. It's a recurring event. You kind of see it in the esophagus. Sometimes you see stuff like that in the pancreas, in the biliary tract, in the gallbladder. Is it all the same thing? I put them through these different platforms. I didn't have to do single-cell dissociation for single-cell RNA-seq with them. And it is indeed the same thing. It's the same pattern as pathologists that we described in 1908 by a Japanese group. It's the same thing that's occurring. These are recurrent events that have biological value. And now it's so easy, you just take the slides. It's expensive. One slide is $8,000. But you can put the slide and well, these are the pathways that are activated within that cluster of cells. The cells right next to them are activating these pathways, etc. So you can interrogate your slides in extreme detail and can reprocess most of the genomics-based protocols or analyses with the data. So I won't go into too much detail. Hidden challenges with AIs, likely you'll see all the papers are being published, have very limited small data sets that are very curated. If you go look at them, there's no artifacts. there's nothing else. There's no fat. You have lymph node or you have tumor, and there's nothing else. I think you need, if you want really good AI algorithms, there's a few that are very good, but they were trained on gigantic data sets. But if you want it for everything else, you'll likely need a lot of data going to the future and overcoming access to mass data. I think at the same time, Bic Nguyen is expanding digital pathology to the province of Quebec. We don't know when, but it's very likely going to happen. But at the same time, the CHUM would like to parallelize, create like a research system right next to that system throughout Quebec for teaching, quality control, and research purposes. And I think deploying mass data to pathology is likely the next frontier of research in our field. So yes, in conclusion, Centre Hospitalier de l'Université de Montréal, we achieved it the first in Canada, in case some other institution comes in and says that it was them. We started in 2013, took a bit of time, but we spoke today about implementation, adoption, and the research. And maybe final thoughts that I didn't address. You must be asking, how did you fund it? Or if this is a question that comes back, how do you fund it? I think it's very difficult. Depends on what situation you're in, what is your environment, is it private, public, what are your turnaround times? I think once you know that, you might have a better idea of how to find funding. But if you can find a way to quantify that, those unquantifiable values are presented, or maybe adjust your environment to something where digital pathology could really improve productivity. I think these are ways to convince and get additional funding. There's a fear of AI, but I think this is a question of having strong representation in legislation, or fear of outsourcing. I know it's a bit hard in the United States with Congress, but I think in Quebec, you cannot sign out a case outside of the province of Quebec if the case was from Quebec. And the other thing was you needed to be a pathologist that was credentialed in Quebec to be able to sign anything out. And the importance of AI research. No, we were talking about these images. We're talking about applying them to create these great tools that everyone has been presenting today during the conference, presenting them for the tools, using them for research for spatial transcriptomics. But there's one aspect, I think, which is amazing with our field, is remember the complexity of our images. These are gigapixels. They can go, if you scan them at 4x, they can go up to 40x, and they go up to 40 gigs of data. And it's not just like you're walking around, you're driving a car, and you see there's a house there, and there's a tree right next to it, but there's no dependency between the tree and the house, right? The tree cannot be there, and the house cannot be there. It changes nothing. But in pathology, all of our cells are connected together. It's like networks, and all these things I think is really could be used, for example, in astronomy, in geography. These are the only other fields that have images that are as complex as ours. There's nothing, I believe, in medicine that is as close, as complex as the images we generate in pathology and we process in our mind. And I think just being able to maybe, instead of using what these other people have been generating for pathology, if you find something in pathology with the challenges and the complexity of pathology, and then you send it elsewhere, I think this is really, you could really advance science exponentially if you create tools that are adapted to our challenges. So yes, that's it. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Bic, Nathalie, everyone, and our collaborators at the show.
Thank you very much, Dr. Trinh, for this inspiring and insightful presentation. I think it's time to open the floor for Q&A. So if you want to approach the microphone and ask a question to Dr. Trinh. Thank you. I have one question for you. You talk, and obviously now that you are fully digital, I mean, next step is to implement AI at scale. So you talk about research where it's quite obvious, but when we talk about spatial transcriptomics, we are ahead from what we do on a daily basis in a pathology department. So my question is, what is for you the most valuable AI tools that you would like to implement in routine? We know there's so many AI applications available, but question is how to make it useful in your daily practice. So
I think it's a very good question that I've often thought about. I think it goes back to those 2 points. Any tools that increases productivity or increases accuracy and precision efficiently, I think those are the 2 main tools that I would see. And I've discussed this. I discussed that in the paper there. I also discussed it with my collaborators and the engineers that are creating these tools. You know, like like a mitotic counter, that's great, right? But how often do you count mitoses? And it's very specialty dependent. Like even I count mitoses in my neuroendocrine tumors, but I'm like I do it a few times. Like, is it really worth it to deploy a full? But there's things that I think where these tools will really accelerate our day-to-day process. And I think this is when the engineer really needs to understand what the pathologist does to direct which app they're going to choose or which tool you want to buy. For example, anything that can process the slides or even just process the pathology report and start filling out like your final diagnosis for you. You can just come back and tweak whatever. I think that is really golden. We talk about the IBEX for the prostate. I think it's great, but we have Dr. Lato, Dr. Albazin, Dr. Trudel. They're all like fellowship trained. Their diagnoses are very, very good. But what is the advantage of the IBEX? It writes, like, yes, it highlights on the screen, but I think for anybody who does that a lot, it's obvious where the cancer is. But it writes down the report for you at the same time in the language that you want. You just ask it to translate it. That is like you're saving time. If you're dictating, you're saving time from the secretary. And if you're fast enough, you don't need additional stains. You can just look at the slides and tweak the report and just sign it out. Even if it's not incredibly, like, if it's accurate, but you need to tweak it, it's completely fine. But if it's writing everything for you, it's like, that I believe is where there's a huge gain in productivity. Same thing for like tedious tasks, like if you look at the lymph node, if the thing already tells you there's a metastasis there, you just check, oh, there's a metastasis next. You don't have to look at the rest of the slide unless there's a lymphoma or something. But you can just pass through it. And then the ones that are negative, maybe they can orient your vision, your attention to areas that have a high probability of metastases, or if not, you can just screen through the lymph node. But I think anything that accelerates these hard-to-find processes will really accelerate the process. But it's so dependent on the case, dependent on the organ, the specimen. So I think anything that's adapted to each specimen. Or for example, I'm kind of working on this with Maddie, Dr. Hosseini. But if you have enough reports, you have enough slides, and you have the grossing report, you can technically fill out the synoptic report automatically for you. And that would be also a big gain of time.
Do you have some recommendation the system you use for scanner or the imaging, manager system?
Oh.
What kind of the realities we have to pick all this system for our hospital? So do you have some top list in your experience?
We never really published, and we never. I would tell you the most important thing is try. I think now they've become pretty comparable. I think if you're capable of maybe going to another institution and trying it out there, seeing how the scanner operates and how the IMS operates for them and talking to them, I think that is the most important thing. I think in the past this was a bit more a critical question, but now everything is so well honed that I think you can try it out, see it. But they asked me to present today. They have all that long history. I just came in, everything was so nice, so much better, easier to sign out than Vanderbilt. I don't have my left shoulder pain anymore. And then we start trying all these different companies, and yes, we use Calipix, and Prochia was there, and then Sectra was there. And everyone was, oh, look at that one, so good. I'm like, honestly, I just find it's the same thing, but that's my opinion. And I'm more about just maybe find whatever is suited to your price. Have the things, if you're research-oriented, you're not research-oriented, you're split over multiple institutions. I think it's much more case-dependent. But I would tell you to try them out first, or find another institution. Like we receive people from Europe, from throughout Canada. They come to the CHUM, we discuss, they look at it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you to you all for attending this presentation. I want to I hope you find it inspiring and motivating. And if you want to know more, I can invite you to our booth number 1035, where you can discover more about our solution. And I want to have a specific, warmful thank you for Dr. Trinh. Thanks a lot. Have a good afternoon.